Hi, I'm Nick Grantham from Zebra People. I'm joined today by Afreen Saulat and Jaffar Khorshidi. We'll be talking today about their progression as contractors and permanent staff within the user research and UX design sector through to setting up their own consultancies, what they've learned along the way, advice they would give to themselves if they could turn back the clock, and general pros and cons as to what's happened throughout their journeys. I've placed both Afreen and Jaffar in contracts in their earlier stages of their career, so I thought it'd be interesting to bring them on the episode today and talk through what's happened since then. Guys, thanks very much for joining the show. Afreen, Jaffar, thanks so much for joining us on today's episode with Zebra People. Why don't we go through a little introduction with each of you and talk about, your general setup and how you've got to this point. I'll start with you, Afreen.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Afreen and I run a consultancy called 100 Kicks, which through which I do culturally competent research and where we're trying to get more organizations to start designing with care. And how did I get here? Honestly, but just like a lot of luck and being in the right place, I guess. Part of that was meeting you, right? And
Very lucky, yeah.
I know,
very
so very fortuitous meeting on LinkedIn. I basically, long story short is I did my degree at Bath and I was doing sociology. I thought I was going to go and be a part of the UN. Realized I absolutely hated politics and then decided to do all these modules in like science and technology and progress, which then led me to do a master's in digital anthropology. So I was in London during that time. And I kind of knew I wanted a career in that area, but I didn't really know what that looked like. And that was the time when I met you. So I just graduated, and looking back at it, I feel like I had all these different, work experiences and everything, but it was quite difficult to land a job actually. And I was thinking, what am I going to do? And then we came across each other, and I signed up to a 2-month contract with the University of Cambridge. And then since then, I've had, the fortune of working at lots and lots of different types of companies. I've weirdly always been a contractor, and I think that's kind of given me an outside look in. And now, I decided to start 100 Kicks, which is my consultancy, and that's been a really nice little. It's like a nice round circle to be doing this conversation with you today.
No, for sure. And you've come a long way within quite a short space of time, actually. And I remember when we first looked at that contract with the University of Cambridge, and it was 2 to 3 months long. And I was just saying to you, you just need to differentiate yourself compared to some of the other graduates out there. And sure enough, not to blow my own trumpet too much, but it did work out. And you went on from there, and you worked at places like Google and Facebook and Tesco within like 3 years. Which is a really, really fast progression within the contract world, within the UX world and user research world. So credit to you for that. You've obviously done something right, apart from just meeting me. And then gone up to set up 100 Kicks. And this is what I wanted to talk to you and Jaffar about. And obviously transitioning from, lots of contract work and experience the market generally to then having a limited company, working as a limited company contractor, to then going on to setting up your own consultancy and how that actually differs. So we'll delve into that a little bit more in a bit. And Jaffar, obviously you and I go back quite a few years as well. Similar story. I think when I got you your contract at Immediate Media, was that the first one?
That was the first one.
Long time ago now.
Yeah.
And so talk us through your journey to this point so far.
Sure. Thank you for having me, first of all. I'm probably on the flip side of the coin when it comes to the differences between me and Afreen. So I'm more on the UX design sort of side. I, also had a passion from a very young age for traditional art. So I used to do a lot of like sketching and like got into like anime character drawing and stuff. And hand in hand, I was always tinkering with electronics. Like the amount of electric shocks I've had as a kid is insane. So naturally, I delved into the world of computer science. That's what I studied at UMIST, which doesn't exist anymore. And it was where I discovered the world of web design. I'm talking like early 2000s. So I was like, oh wow, like I could potentially take my art and bring it to life. And I got myself like a stylus with a tablet, started like sketching interfaces and learned, self-taught how to code HTML and CSS at the time. I ended up doing quite a few sort of small-time projects for like, local councils, local businesses and stuff, as you do. And I eventually launched my portfolio, which caught the attention of my dream agency, Fantasy. They somehow came across it. It won quite a few awards back then, and then they reached out and they were like, hey, you'd make an awesome UX designer. And I was like, I have no idea what that is, but I'll take it. So there's no real sort of academic background or anything. It's just my love for creating or the craft, essentially. Moved to London after like a year, got married, landed my first perm role, and then that's when I met you. So this was circa 2013.
Yeah, around that time, yeah.
Been through many contracts ever since, been back to perm. I ended up going to Microsoft at one point. Been around the block with the agencies, name it, I've probably been there. Until most recently, I eventually found my way back into Fantasy. So they expanded out to the UK. And yeah, for the last few years, it's just been Nuvio that I've been operating under. So it's a consultancy transitioning into almost like a micro agency now. Yeah.
So obviously you both have successful careers in user research and UX design. I guess what I'm keen to know about, and perhaps some of the viewers would be keen to know as well, was what made you decide to go from a limited company contractor, a regular sort of gun for hire, into setting up a consultancy? And I guess what I'd like to expand on past that is how that actually differs to just running your band of one. So Afreen, perhaps let's start with you. What led to you deciding actually I want to change up from being just someone who's going to flip from a 3-month contract to 6-month contract to setting up 100 Kicks? And what does 100 Kicks stand for as well?
Yeah, I mean, all very good questions. I mean, I got fired. That would definitely...
That would be a bit of a trigger.
That definitely helped in I always knew that I wanted to do my own thing, but I think I was always a bit scared. And then there was a point in my career, I won't mention who it was, but I remember this contract. I thought it was going okay. It was obviously not. And then I got fired. And it just kind of brought up all these existential questions of what am I doing? And is this really how I want to be working? And is this the kind of career I want to have where I'm always at the mercy of and this is not to say that if you're running your own agency or consultancy, you're not at the whim of a client, but I don't know. I think you have a bit more agency and autonomy over what you're doing. I was reading about limited companies and I was trying to understand what goes on when you have one. And yeah, there were a lot of questions around outside, inside R35, all this kind of stuff. Because, I mean, although I've been running 100 Kicks for around a year and a half, I do still take on freelance work if, that's a one person coming in. The only difference is that and I talk about this a lot, it's all about mindset as well. So I'll do projects that are a bit bigger, and so I'll bring in other people that I know of who might be really good researchers or designers or something, and then we'll work on it. But then there might be projects which just require me. But I'm still coming in as an external consultant and as a representative of my company, as opposed to just Afreen.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that is one of the big differences. And I think also is the amount of effort you put into setting up, right? So I made sure that I talked to other people who've set up successful consultancies. They gave me, links to good accountants. That's probably the biggest piece of advice is the logistics. Get yourself good accountants who will answer every issue for you. Doing that sort of thing, and just being really clear about branding, and I've always treated it as a business from the beginning. And so that's why I haven't really worried so much about, initially when I was worrying about inside and outside, I don't worry about that as much now, because I just think, no, for me this is a business. I'm looking at it as like a wider entity rather than just myself.
Yeah.
So, I think that applies regardless of whether it's just you working on a project versus when you're bringing other people in. And as for the name, it's my second name, which is Saulat. So I saw in Hindi means 100 and Lat means kicks. And I just always thought it was, I just thought it was
cool
fun.
name.
Yeah. And also because people are always naming businesses after themselves. But I just thought, people always mispronounce my second name. It's always salt. I've even had salad, which I don't understand how people have gotten there. But yeah, I think that's kind of, for me, what's been really important is like getting in the mindset of like, okay, I'm not operating as a freelancer who's just looking for the next contract to like make ends meet. I'm looking at it as like each project I take, what does this mean for the business and what does this mean for future work, right? Because one example I'll give, which is really, really, it's quite funny, but like I have a friend who runs a charity called ESEA, which is East Southeast Asian Music. And she really wanted to do a survey for her members because they want to raise more money in the future years. And she said, okay, cool, can you do a survey for us? But we don't want to run like a boring diversity survey. And I was like, absolutely, like that's why I started this. So I worked with them, we built this amazing survey, they presented the insights at like Sony Music, it was all very good. And then because we did that bit of work, I've now recently won this piece of work that we're doing with this company who are building a D&I tool. Because they saw that and they thought, okay, cool, this is how we want to do it, right? And so that's what I meant about, consciously choosing the work to grow your business rather than thinking, okay, cool, can I just do this bit of work to bring in money? And I think that's been my biggest shift from being like, a contractor where I was just doing it because I just thought, okay, cool, I'm just a portfolio careerist who's trying to add names versus now where I'm thinking, okay, what does this mean for this business in like the wider context?
So now you're curating a bit of a theme, or not a theme, but
no, you're right, theme.
For your consultancy, and then obviously off the back of that, you'll hopefully win more business that again relate to that sector.
Exactly.
Okay, nice, and that's a good one to be involved with as well. And Jaffar, how about your journey? What led you to setting up Nuvio?
Trial and error, a lot of failures. Again, from a young age, I knew I always wanted to have my own sort of entity at some point. When I moved to the UK, like I said, started a permanent role here, wasn't quite happy in it. I was sort of leading the very start of them sort of establishing like a UX department within the agency. It was a traditional sort of branding and print agency. I then decided overnight, I had told my wife, I was like, I think I'm just going to set up my own company. And she was like, do you know what you're doing? And I was like, hell no. Like, there's no way I know what I'm doing, but what can go wrong, right? So I actually set up a company back then in 2013 called UX Bureau. Instantly, somehow,
that was your limited company.
That was my limited company when we first met.
Yeah.
I landed my very first contract at Sky back then. 2 weeks after landing this contract, I've gone into this world of contracting, freelancing, not knowing what I'm doing. I'm just going with the flow. My dad suddenly ended up passing away. So I had to then take time off, and then it was like, oh no, like there's no secure, stable sort of income. My wife was studying for a master's at the time in architecture, and so I was naturally the only breadwinner. So I had to very quickly go back in, and there were a lot of mistakes made over time. Accounting, especially. Like you're just on top of your accountant constantly. Like, when do I pay this? When's this due? Like, what do I do here? You just sort of learn, I guess, along the way as well. I ended up shutting that down after a while, and then joined Microsoft permanently. 6 months of, I don't mean to sort of talk bad about them, but I think it's generally like this in the product world. The pace for me was too slow. Going from, agency life where you're pushing out products within the space of like 3 months, and like all of a sudden it's out there in the wild, fully built, fully functioning. You're actually sat on the train on your morning commute and there's someone using it, to debating the position of a search bar for 6 months, like it wasn't really the pace I was used to. So I decided again, I'm going to go back to freelancing. And that's when I set up Nuvio. But for me, it was, at the time, I think, even with UX Bureau, the main goal for me was I want to work in every industry possible. That's where you're exposed to these opportunities, because you could be working on an automotive brand for like 6 months, and then you're on the flip side launching like the world's biggest cruise ship. So that exposure to like all of the industries, that was the thing that sort of had me going more than anything.
Yeah, fair enough. And have you got a favorite in like sector so far that you particularly like working in?
I mean, you know the answer to this one. It's definitely automotive.
Yeah.
I'm very biased towards a particular brand, Mercedes.
Yep.
And I was recently, 2019, that's when I was brought back to fantasy. They headhunted me. The founder, David Martin, he realized I was living in London, and this is like a good 9 years after I had left. He had landed Mercedes as an account, working directly with Gordon Wagner, the chief design officer, who's like the Jonathan Ives of the automotive world. Like everybody wants this guy. And he was like, you're into the brand, you've grown up with it, you know it better than anyone.
Awesome.
Like the passion is going to be there, right? So that's when I ended up rejoining fantasy, and I was there ever since, basically, until this past September.
Yeah, that's a cool peak. Well, not to say it's not the only peak, but a great sort of milestone for you to hit. And a little sidebar, Jaffar and I, when we first started speaking, we're both into cars. We're looking at your dream car back then, the Mazda RX-8, which you got through the contracting, and now you're rolling around in a Mercedes AMG. What a journey to see from my side of the fence as well. And I see it with lots of the people I speak to early in their careers, and then obviously they progress and achieve different things along the way. Not everyone's into the cars, but it's always nice to keep track of them as well.
For sure.
So well done with that. So if you could, each of you, rewind time and go back and be like, right, okay, you're still at the point where you want to set up your own consultancy, and you figured out, right, okay, well, this is how it differs to what I'm doing as a gun for hire, as a regular contractor. I want to set up my own thing. What advice would you give to yourself back then that you wish you'd known at the time, perhaps?
Don't sell yourself short. Generally, I've always been a bit of a shy person. I'm open to opportunities that appeal to me, that interest me. And I found at the very start, I used to go in quite low when it came to like the day rate. Funny story with Sky. I didn't look into like the market or the industry, like what are you meant to charge? I'd say do your research, definitely, for sure. Look at the sort of benchmark for your level. But yeah, I remember going in there and they were asking, like, what's your day rate? And I was like, oh, 250, I guess. Like, it was a lot for me. I was like, 250 sounds okay. Like, it's a lot of money. And the two managers just sort of looked at each other and they were like, yeah, no, like, you need to go higher. They were really nice people, honestly. They actually told me, like, what the benchmark was and what I should be going in at. But that was probably a learning curve for me.
Fair enough. No wonder you got me that track day when I got you the rate that I needed media. Fair, that makes it all adds up now. So back yourself and look at the market rates.
For sure.
Or perhaps again, there could be a question if you're dealing with a recruiter. But with a consultancy, I guess that maybe that would differ though, right? Because you're quoting on a project fee rather than a day rate.
It depends. The way I tend to operate is depending on the type of project, like the duration and the requirements in terms of like resources and stuff as well. It's either a day rate or like a fixed sort of project fee. It very much depends, but I've always made it like a conscious sort of decision to cater to the client. Like if they have a set budget in mind, I will work with what I can and sort of give them a tailored proposal to say like, okay, this is what we can sort of offer. It varies project to project, I think, for me.
And Afreen, what would you say to your former self when setting up your consultancy in the early days?
I think it was really serendipitous because I made a post about it on LinkedIn about like why I started 100 Kicks in the first place, and like I started it primarily because all the places that we've spoken about, and this is just my experience, is just that I just felt like they're not very representative, and they don't really think about their culture in terms of all the kind of people that they're employing. I just don't really think they're very good at diversity, you know, especially when they're claiming to be. And that bleeds into how you build, research and design a product, because if you yourself have these prejudices, they do come out in what you're building. And so 100 Kicks was established to be something that goes against that, right? And gets these companies to think differently. But taking that stance is kind of scary, right? Because you're basically saying, oh, I think what you're doing is wrong and we want to propose a new way of doing things. And I just happened to meet this person who, she was really pivotal. She's a strategist and she'd worked at other agencies that I really admired. And she came on to kind of help me give 100 Kicks its branding and its image. And we spoke about all my inspiration for the business, both from like inside of user research to like outside, you know, especially in terms of women that influence me, just like writers, the thinking process, that kind of thing. And then that's what's become 100 Kicks, right? Like that's where we've come up with terms like culturally competent research or designing with care and like coming up with our principles or doing that piece of research that we did that I've just spoken about. And yeah, I think that's what I wish I'd done that sooner, you know?
That's great to have some proper meaning to your focus and the work that you're doing. And is that, you know, on your journey as a contractor, as a, you know, consultancy owner, you know, we talked about diversity, have you felt that, you know, that's been a change within the market as well? Do you feel like have you come across that yourself in a positive way or a negative way, or have you seen increases? Because on my side of the fence, I've definitely seen a lot more of a push towards diversity and clients really trying to make more diverse hires. But there's that difference between sort of tokenism and genuinely being like, right, we're going to get better results if we've got a more mixed team.
Yeah, it's difficult though, because I mean, on the one hand, I think, taking back the example of the company, for instance, initially, instead of saying we do culturally competent research, we were actually wanting to use the term intersectionally feminist. But then we quickly realized that like most businesses are just not quite there yet. Like within academic circles, people know what intersectional means, right? Like it's taking into account not just that, we've got to research with more black people. It's like, okay, we also have to take into account gender, class, economic situation, because those are the intersections that make up a person, right? And like their entire story. And only when you have a fuller story can you then design better or like learn better, or like learn more things about these people that you're claiming to know so much about. And then, in my first few instances when we had that term in the deck, like you just had people like really confused, like, oh my God, what the hell does that mean, you know, or just really scared. And so I even got, you know, feedback from a mentor of mine, and she said, hey, maybe you need to change that, because she's like, you might have clients who really want to do that, but they're really scared by the word and they think, oh God, I don't understand it, so it must mean that this isn't for me. So you need to kind of cater it and make sure that whilst you're still like, you know, flying your flag and have your branding, that it's still communicable. And that can only happen if you have other people who you can work with to help you make that communication happen, which is what I eventually got, you know, in this person who I hired in as a strategist, who then helped me bring the vision to life, but also being open to having people who've been where you are tell you, hey, this might work or that might work. So yeah, I feel like that if I'd started earlier, maybe I would have had a better idea. But going back to your question about diversity, I think we are kind of moving in the right direction. But yeah, I mean, we're not at a point where people, I think, can fully engage with terms like intersectionality and like feminism without cringing and thinking that, you know, it means that we're all about to burn our bras and have hairy armpits. So like, that's the only thing that I'm a bit wary of.
Yeah, fair enough. But it hasn't, you know, you've not, you don't feel like it's affected your journey to where you are now. Like I say, in terms of, it could be a good thing or a bad thing. You know, everyone talks a good game, and diversity is a really hot topic, and rightly so. I don't mean to dumb it down at all, but user research, sometimes clients might talk about user research and user research methodologies, but when it comes to the crunch, that's the first thing to get shelved sometimes. And so if they want to impress a client, if they're an agency, for example, and they want to impress a client, say, our research tells us this, our research tells us that, because it sounds good, it sounds like they've done the depth of it, but then when there's a crunch time with budgets or time, that might get shelved, and they'll use their own sort of intuition to come to the solution. And I wonder sometimes whether when clients will talk about diversity, again, how deep is that? And I don't know. It's a tricky one to really get your head around sometimes. But I don't know if you've experienced any of that for better or worse during your journey towards where you are now.
I've personally never encountered any sort of negativity. I've had my fair share where it's like, you're in a role and the client is Middle Eastern or Asian, and they just assume you just know the culture, even though it's like, I'm from a different part, There's a huge difference between Persians and Arabs. But I mean, I try to keep an open mind around it. Like, I've been asked on an occasion in the past where we had like a project for, I think it was the royal family of the UAE. It was like a super top secret stealth device they were making for them. And they were like, looking around the team, and I was the only Asian there. And it was like, hey, can you translate this stuff into Arabic? And I was like,
really?
Not quite.
Oh man. I guess that's more naivety rather than...
Yeah.
I don't know if it's naivety.
I think it's perhaps
I think, I mean, did they know where you were from?
No.
They didn't?
No.
But they just assumed. I feel like that's a bit wild, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't just assume.
That's not cool, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Afreen? Have you...
We've talked about me before. Yeah, this has been like... I think this is the reason why 100 Kicks exists, because I'm so annoyed by it all. It's interesting about your experience, though, that you never really... I mean, I just want to ask as well, like, is it also because... how have you felt as, like, a man as well? Do you think that's also had an impact?
No. It might be a shock to hear. I grew up in a household full of women.
Right.
So I grew up with my mom and my two sisters. My dad was always away at work, New York, hustle and bustle life. So we would be asleep when he left the house. We would be asleep when he came home.
Right.
We would literally see him on the weekends. So I literally grew up amongst women. And then I got married, and I ended up having 2 daughters. So I'm still living amongst women.
Nice.
So I'm very in touch with my feminine side.
Yeah.
I'm not potentially what you may have expected. Like,
right, yeah.
This is who I am. What you see is what you get, kind of thing. And I've always had that soft approach. Like, I'm not one to like flip a table because a design project has gone wrong, or it's always about keeping a calm, level head. Emotions do get involved naturally, especially if you're so passionate with your work. But yeah, I've never really, again, I may be an exception, but I've never experienced this whole, because I'm a man, I get treated in a certain way or anything. I actually feel the opposite. Just because of my own personality.
Yeah.
That's all it is, yeah.
I mean, we also live in a patriarchy, which doesn't always help, right? I mean, I don't know. I think what you were saying about how people expect you to behave versus who you really are, I feel like I find that a lot. People have a stereotypical idea of what a South Asian woman who exists in a body like mine how they might behave, be very soft-spoken, or like, I don't know, not speak English as well, or like have a certain accent, or I don't know. There's a lot of assumptions because of what we've seen in the media. And so when I have met with potential clients, or if I've met with like people who I'm going to be working with, sometimes you can see they're a little bit like, oh, I didn't expect that. And I think, especially as a woman who is quite opinionated and is not quite, I don't feel like I can't go into a room and say, okay, this is how I feel, because people don't always expect that. It caused me a lot of grief in my early career, because I would go into rooms thinking, okay, cool, like, we're in a feminist world now. I can go out and say how I feel in a meeting, and I should be able to do that without people judging me or reprimanding me for it. But I did get reprimanded, and I, was scolded like, oh, you shouldn't be saying that. Or like, the year when I was looking for work before we got in touch, I remember I was interviewing for like a junior product manager role. And I got to like the final round, so I'd already had a conversation, and I think it was a task-based interview, and it was basically about, I can't even remember what it was about anymore, right? That's not even relevant, but we did the whole thing. And from what I understand, having worked in this industry, like the point of a product manager is to have boundaries and to have an opinion, right? Because you should be able to say like, this is why we're building this thing, and this is why I stand behind why we're building it this way. And so I think my task was similar in that I had to explain to them why I'd gone with the decision I had. And I still remember the email that I got when I just didn't get the role, and I kept asking like, hey, what went wrong? Because I thought it went great, right? Because you were all smiling, and they'd said, yeah, we'll get in touch about our next round. And they just said, yeah, we just thought you were very opinionated, and we need somebody who really looks at everything and is a little bit more diplomatic. And I just thought, no, this is ridiculous. Like, you were very happy with this initially, and I couldn't help but contend with this idea that it was just because they didn't expect it to come from me. And that was the story of that year, right? Like, I got to 4 final round interviews for these various roles. I had 2 degrees. I had so much work experience. I'd done an internship every summer. Like, I was probably not even trying to blow my own trumpet, but I just genuinely didn't know what else I could have done to be a better candidate. And then I finally got the role that I got with you. That's
the difference.
That's the difference. But we spoke about this when we first met as well, right? Like, I remember having this conversation with you when we met in person and we went for coffee. And I said to Nick, I was like, I feel like I'm going insane, but I feel like I'm in Get Out or something, because I've gone to each of these interviews, and I'm obviously not crap because I'm getting to the final rounds, but I'm not getting anywhere. And they all keep bringing up personality traits or culture fit as a reason for not hiring me. And I can't help but think that it's because of the fact that I'm a South Asian woman, that they don't expect to behave the way that I do. And I remember you saying that, like, you have noticed that within some of the clients that you had, where they have a unsaid expectation for who they want to hire, and that it can be really difficult to dismantle those things. And that wasn't that long ago. That was in 2018, right?
Well, that's it. A question that sort of leads on to another question I've got in terms of you winning new business as a consultancy owner compared to getting a contract as a limited company contractor, which might go through a recruiter, for example, someone like me, where I will sell you basically to the client, and I will say this person is suitable because of X, Y, and Z. They communicate really well, or this is their personality to a degree, and hopefully I know enough about that client or that position past just what it says on a piece of paper to make the match, right? But when it comes to you getting business as a consultancy owner, one, I guess, how do you do it? Because I guess it's not the same. You wouldn't go through a recruiter in the same way. And 2, I guess that problem might arise again because especially if it's a cold contact, you don't have a middleman or middle person, I should say, selling you. So question number 1, I guess, how do you go about getting new business as a consultancy owner?
I think it's kind of leads to our initial question, which was about like, what would we have done differently? I think the more honest I was about my branding and who I was, the easier it became to figure out who you want to go after. Because then when I sat down with that strategist and I was like, this is what I want to build, it becomes very clear what kind of work you want to do. And then I think you kind of naturally align with the people that are doing that same work. So for like a very quick example, like the work that I'm doing right now with this small startup who are building this product and they have funding for it, like I literally came across her because I have a mentor who has worked in the same industry. She started and like she sold her agency, like she's done an amazing job, right? So she just said to me, she's very generous. She said, go through my list of people on LinkedIn and find people who you think you might want to work with. And I said, all right, cool. And so I literally just did that. As woo-woo as this sounds, like I just genuinely went with my intuition. I looked at people's profiles and I thought, okay, looking at where they've worked, looking at what they're doing now, can I imagine myself working with them? if I felt like, yeah, I just messaged them, and literally that is how I met this client, you know. It all started out off of literally a 45, what was meant to be a 30-minute call turned into an hour, turned into a few more conversation that's then led to a project.
Brilliant.
Right, and like now she has board members and she's friends with other people. If we do a good piece of work for her,
Sure, yeah.
she'll hopefully introduce us to other people. Or like, you don't know, I don't know, have you found it? Because I feel like sometimes projects come from places you don't even expect.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I totally resonate with what you just said. Again, I would say I've been quite fortunate in the sense that I think this is the wrong question for me, because 5-6 years of running Nuvio, I have never actively sought a client. So if you ask me, how do you find new leads? I'm the wrong guy to go to.
But I guess in relation, a lot of yours have come through doing a good job with one person. And
basically, yeah. So a lot of it has been, past relations. So like if I've worked on a client project, a stakeholder from there may potentially come out and reach out to me directly, or they may move into another role at a different company and be like, hey, worked with this guy before, did an amazing job, committed, whatever. That's who we need. So I've been very fortunate in that sense. Like the word of mouth is like the primary sort of means for me. Going back to the previous question where I was mentioning like my personality, I'm known, I guess, in the industry for like my commitment, my dedication, and more than anything, my integrity. Like a project could be going super sour. I may have like a real bad relationship with my direct line manager within a contract. But I'm the guy that will not leave. I will be the first one in, I'll be the last one out.
Yeah, right.
I will be there until we launch this thing. Like no matter, I'll give it my 110.
That's it. Even when you've been a contractor,
yeah,
I assume you've been like that. I'm sure you would have been.
Yeah.
And again, that will come back around, right? Because sometimes, I know I've had it with certain contractors. Things haven't gone, Jacob Nielsen's way of doing things in terms of UX, and they've walked, or they've been like, you know what, I'm not attached to this company, I'm done. And as a contractor, as a gun for hire, fine, bang, you're done with that contract, on to the next one. But when you've got a bigger picture of setting up a consultancy, or where you want to grow your network, our industry is a lot tighter than
very much.
This is true. Yeah,
and it comes back around, right? So
yeah.
I know you said you're fortunate, but actually it's that graft, it's that determination, it's that what you put on your shoulders to stick with it. That's what I'm assuming has led to your success. And I feel like as a recruiter, I like to back myself and think I do a good job. And a lot of my new business will come from people I've never even placed before, but because when I had them as a candidate, I've done my best to try and help them, advise them, whatever, and they'll come back to me. Please come back to me as a client, or recommend me to a client, and a similar thing. That's how I've got the clients I've got today.
Absolutely.
And although I probably still have to picture a fair bit more new business than you do, I suspect.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess it would be. Any advice you would give to other people who are potentially looking to set up their own consultancy, aside from thinking cyclically in terms of, work hard, don't leave, don't burn any bridges, and any advice that you can give that would allow them to start bringing on their own clients, aside from just working hard, and leaving good impressions.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you could advise in terms of pitching or approaching people, maybe going to events, anything like that?
Actually, one thing that I look back at in my first year, and I think I would definitely not do, is like apply for tenders. Actually, I think especially when you don't know the end client, or you don't have any sort of personal contact there, because there were some really cool bits of work that I kept applying for and wouldn't win any of it, because it is like a word of mouth world, and it's like very much your relationship. So if you work somewhere and they know you, then you're much more likely to get it. But then, also not letting something like that hold you back. Like if there's a tender that's come out that's really interesting, maybe reach out to them, have a conversation, and if they like you, that's good. I was actually going to touch upon your point of working super hard, and it's so interesting because one of the first things that I did when I set up 100 Kicks is it's on our website. We've got I'd written it in my journal initially, but it's basically 10 things that we want for clients to consider for a more equitable workspace. So like to actually take into account how to work better, what we talked about, diversity basically, and like how to create a more equitable workspace by taking these 10 things into account. And that's another thing that I think is really important, to have repeat clients or to have like a good working relationship, which I think is different to when you're a contractor, is to just be like, okay, cool, this is how much we're going to work and this is how we're going to work and these are our working hours, and being respectful of each other about that,
So that's less transactional and a lot more combined,
exactly.
Incorporated.
It is a relationship, right? Like ultimately, in spite of there being like a paper contract, you are working with human beings. And I think sometimes in the places that I've worked in before, because it's all like fast, we need to build something and get it out tomorrow, you lose the perspective of the fact that these are actual human beings doing this work. And I think when you bring in things like intersectionality, as a woman, like there are other things that I'm contending with in life, which then impact how I might be performing at work, right? Like we have a menstrual cycle. Like there are weeks when I'm a bit more productive and then when I'm not. Or like you just don't know what the personal crises are of people. Yeah. So like being able to accommodate for that in your working environment and making sure you communicate that to a client designs a more equitable environment where more people want to work and more people feel heard and seen. And I think that's like probably one of the things that I look back at and think, don't apply for tenders, even if place looks cool, because you just don't know what the people there are actually like, and reach out to the people there, actually understand who they are, see if you have a relationship, and see if actually they'd be open to working in an equitable way with you and not just this transactional, how much can I get out of you?
Yeah. And how do you go about like the tenders? How do you find them?
They're just listed, aren't they? Like, yeah, sometimes on LinkedIn, sometimes they're just like on websites, but they're usually like for much like larger chunks of money, right? They're like 50K up or something. So I think that's for like really, really big projects. And I think that's why I was saying it's very much dependent on, if you've never met anyone behind the team before, you think it's like applying for a competition and that you might win based on how good you are, but it's absolutely not that. Like it really is relationships and like who you know and whether they probably already promised it to someone that they know. And they're just doing this because they're doing a due diligence. And I learned that the hard way, right? Like I applied to so many thinking, oh yeah, like we've got a great proposal, of course we're gonna get this. And we didn't, right? So that was a big, hard kind of learning. And also the fact that a lot of projects aren't tendered, right? Like you do just spin them out. You're speaking to someone, like you said, somebody reached out to you and said, hey, this is happening. And this is before it even turns into a tender, if it even, that might not even need to happen. But yeah, like you've had a few more years in the industry, I think. So like you've had the experience to build that up. And I think for me, I haven't quite had that level of experience yet. So it makes it even more pertinent for someone like me to make sure I'm going to events and like getting myself out there. And that's why it's even more important to have stronger branding and to say like, this is what we do. So it's like a slightly different approach because of where we've started from. But yeah, I agree with you, the same sentiment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for you, in your case as well, the market is generally a lot more saturated now as well. So it's like, there's a lot of competition. Like you really have to sort of set yourself apart in that sense.
Like people have to like you, to be honest. I think that's what I found, like even this year, it's not been awful. Like I think it's about how much people like you. You can have 5 masters and like, have worked at like all the amazing places. But if you're just not somebody that that the other person is gonna resonate with, it's just not gonna be a good working relationship. But it's also about you recognizing that with a client, right? Like if a client you can see clearly if you're not gonna be able to be friends with them outside of this context, like it's hard.
Again, in that sort of relationship where you're more than just a gun for hire who's going to sit in the virtual corner and tap away on a keyboard and actually be properly involved in project decisions and strategy and what other things that go into the overall work, your relationship is going to be that much more vital, right? And a lot what you're saying, I feel like I can identify it with as a recruiter because if we take your setup as a contractor, or a gun for hire, and you go and do a contract, transactional, 3 months, 6 months, bang, onto the next one.
Yeah.
I feel like recruitment can be like that as a, we might get lucky and place one person for a contract or a permanent position, and then that's it. That's a relationship over with that client. But if you can really get to know that client, that contact, the wider team, and become in recruiting a partner rather than just a CV sender, portfolio sender, and then you become much more integral to the plans of that company or that team, and you start being involved in more hires. You might even start giving some of your input towards hiring strategy. But again, so much of that will revolve around, your knowledge and being likable, or at least meeting people, and going to events and doing all the sort of personal networking that allows the client to realise what else you can bring to the table other than just a few CVs, and get lucky with one of them.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. A sort of teaching of my dad's comes to mind, which I've essentially lived my whole life following this principle, which he used to tell me, like, it doesn't matter if you're working for yourself or if you're working for someone else. Treat their business as if you would treat your own, as if it belongs to you. And that's essentially like having that respect, having that empathy, whether it's the end client, whether it's in-house, having that humbleness, essentially, like stay humble. That's probably the advice I'd give to someone starting out in their career, all the way, if they're at director level. Like, don't let ego take over. Yeah. The reputation, like, it's hard to build, but it's very easy to wipe, That's something I've, lived by, literally. And that in itself, to your question, has helped bring in the clientele. I've been pulled into contracts where they've actually not wanted me to do any actual work. It's like, we have this client who is quite difficult, and 2 permanent staff have ended up quitting. 3 contractors have ended up just dropping it halfway, and we think you're the guy that can come in. And all I've had to do is just form that relationship, gain that client's trust. Literally, at Fantasy again, I was known as the client whisperer. I've had clients literally call me in when I've been on a break, not on a holiday, but a project has ended. I've decided to take a month off, and clients have ended up saying, we want this guy back.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, what is the objective? What is the task? We just need you to attend the Zoom calls and
It's funny, that's such a strong skill, and it probably doesn't get talked about enough. We talk about, especially in UX or design, we talk about the ability with certain softwares or what sectors you worked in before or whatever. And obviously, everyone is looking for good communication skill, but there's a difference between good communication skill and being able to pitch well or get across ideas well, but actually being able to put your arm around a stakeholder, particularly a tricky stakeholder, and pacify them and communicate effectively still is definitely something that I think will get people brought back into projects. When I talk with contractors, for example, there are some who are technically brilliant and they've got the sort of PhD background perhaps, or they've got all the qualifications and they've got a vast amount of experience, but they perhaps could be a bit of a grenade in certain scenarios, or they could cause some conflict. And sometimes conflict is good and it's justified, but again, it depends on that client. Sometimes you need that person who is going to be able to come in and handle things the right way. If things go wrong, they might still flag it, but they're not going to cause, not going to start flipping over tables, for example, and they're going to be able to communicate in that right way. And I think sometimes that pragmatism and that ability to humanize a situation can really, really go a long way. So that's really good advice there.
It's just so interesting. I don't know if this is a generational difference, because I absolutely would not treat a company like it's my own if it's not my own. Because I especially when we were talking about how, once they want to let you go, you're just a mere number, right? And on TikTok, you see Gen Z talking about how 5 o'clock they're done with work, right? They're shutting off their laptops and not giving their life away to work. And I think, I'm on the cusp of Gen Z and millennial, and I initially started out my career, in a similar way to you, and I feel like that's also because of growing up with immigrant parents who have been, who drilled into me like you always have to do better than like what your peers are doing if you want to get ahead in life, and I kind of did that a lot. But I think now I just kind of am a bit like I'm gonna do good work, you know, but I'm not gonna kill myself for it anymore. Like I'm not gonna give up my life or like, you know, give up my weekends anymore to like appease and to make this person happy. Instead, I want to work with clients who are happy to work in a kind of sustainable way where they're not like expecting me to give everything over in order for us to work well. But unlike you, I'm sometimes quite direct, and so that can be difficult with certain clients. But then I've also recognized that in myself. So like, for example, with this project that we're doing, I have another researcher, and what's great about her is that she has a slightly softer approach. So when we're having client meetings, I make sure that she's there, so then I can be the person who's very direct, but then she can have the softer edge, right? And so it's like, I think when you're then running a business or a consultancy, it's about recognizing what kind of person you are. And that, like, I'm great for like winning the business or like the client, you know, getting them to see our vision. But when it comes to some of the day-to-day annoyances, I'm maybe not amazing at that because I get annoyed and then that's just fueling the fire.
Right, that's good. Also really good advice. Yeah, I guess sort of thinking about who you're bringing into your consultancy.
Yeah, to help you.
And win that client and get the work done right in your way, and the client that works for both you
exactly.
and the client. That's interesting. And it's also interesting how you yourself got that really direct approach, but you've created this sort of work format that is quite balanced and sort of works well for you. And Jaffar, you're perhaps less direct and perhaps more passive, but you've got this sort of workaholic sort of attitude to it. It's quite funny how your two personalities
are quite different.
Yeah, completely.
You perhaps associate the way you work with the other types of personalities.
Yeah.
I mean, to your point, I again 100% agree with you. Like, if a company is expecting me to put in 18 hours, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, like how do you do that? Like, how do you manage it?
For me, it's more. I mean, we didn't get to touch on this or anything, but. I've mentioned it at the start. When my dad passed away, like I said, I had 9 or 10 days off work, and then reality hits, right? Like, I have to pay the rent, I have to pay the bills. I had only just started, so work actually became my way of sort of suppressing. It became my escape from reality. I actually didn't process my father had passed away.
Damn, yeah.
Believe it or not, it only hit me last year. And that's when I had like my breakdown kind of thing. Me and Nick have briefly discussed this as well in the past. The hours I put in, I would actually get told off for it. So Fantasy was the agency I worked for the last 4 years. When they say like work is not a family and, it's all like a fad and it's really just a community of people striving for the same vision, I don't actually agree with that. I 100% say they have created a family. Like, they're very empathetic towards their staff. There is a hierarchy. I mean, you have managers, you have directors that you report into. My youngest daughter falls sick for whatever reason. She catches a bug at school. They're all the way in America, by the way. They don't have headquarters out here in the UK. Out of nowhere, like, I will receive a gift for her and like a toy for my eldest, and it's like, she's just caught a bug, like nothing has happened, but they will go out of their way to like look after you in that sense. There's zero expectation to work that many hours. It's just me, and I've been trying to cut it down and move away. I recently quit in September, essentially to take time off and like focus on myself.
They're being too nice because they were being too nice to you.
They were being too nice to me. They were actually being too nice to me, honestly. And I can almost say the same for every other agency. I've, like I said, I've been around the block. Fantasy has been and always will be home. But like, I could reach out to Sapient today and they will remember 6-7 years ago what I had done for them when that client was being difficult. I came in, I put the fire out, It's these kind of things that people remember. And to your point, again, I would never work for an agency or a company that expects you to like go above and beyond. It's just been a personal thing more than anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's really good. Guys, I really appreciate your advice and coming on to the episode today. So thank you very much. And all the best for 2024. Thanks again.